Hello, good evening, or everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. My name is Joe, and I'm from the not-for-profit social enterprise Opus Independence that runs and coordinates the Festival of Debate. Now, the Festival of Debate is an annual programme run by Opus Independence that is a series of events that are designed to bring people together to discuss our understanding of the world. Now, this year's programme is Pay What You Feel to ensure that all of our events are free at the point of access, but we do rely on donations from audience members to help us make it happen. If you'd like to donate to support the Festival of Debate, you can do so by clicking on festivalofdebate.com or clicking on the PayPal link we'll share in the chat. The festival team will be monitoring the chat tonight, and we'd like to ask all audience members to please be respectful of others, and we'll remove anyone from our events who does not follow our Safer Festival policy, which is available on our website. Please do use the Q&A function tonight to ask our guests tonight any questions you'd like. We'll be coming to that in the last 20 minutes of tonight's event. You can do that by using the Q&A box in the webinar. And yes, please do put any questions on there. That's it from me. I'm now very pleased to hand over to our chair for tonight's event. Please welcome Auriel.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, everybody. It's so great to have everybody here today. And it's an absolute pleasure to introduce to you David, the Right Honourable David Lammy, MP for Tottenham since 2000, Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, Shadow Lord Chancellor in Labour's Shadow Cabinet, and author of this fantastic book that I've been spending time with over the last couple of weeks, which is Tribes, How Our Need to Belong Can Make or Break Society. And I'm so pleased to be in conversation with David tonight. So David, if you want to make yourself seen and heard. So I believe you're in your office in the Commons.
I am in my office in the Commons.
Has it been a busy day?
It's been a busy day, but importantly, I am winding up the debate on the Queen's speech on the floor of the House tonight. So after this, I will literally be hot-footing it to the House of Commons. So if anyone wants to continue David Lammy on the parliamentary channel, they will see me winding up the Queen's speech.
So if an hour and a bit of David Lammy isn't enough, you've got your cue, everybody. You can hit parliamentary TV. Brilliant. Well, and it feels very, very timely and really related to the book. Is it? I think you're talking about safer communities tonight. Am I right? Is that the debate?
Yes. So today is the sort of Justice Day of the Queen's speech, and my colleague Nick Thomas Simmons opened for us. I am closing, and we're centering on violence against women and girls. So it's kind of it's an important debate.
Really important, yeah, subject close to my heart. So, well, we'll make sure that you go in good time to go and close that debate. So what we're going to do is have a conversation for about 30 or so minutes, and then I'm sure the questions will be coming thick and fast through that time, and then I'll open and do my best to chair those. A note for the audience on the Q&A, I'm told through the magic of Zoom webinars that we can have democracy in action. So you can do what's called upvoting. Never heard of it myself, but when you see the questions, you can do a kind of thumbs up on them if you like the look of that question, and it will magically send it to the top of my list. So let's see what a couple of hundred people want to talk to you about, David. So I've got to lay my cards on the table. I loved the book. I was just mesmerized by its depth and its breadth, actually, and the amount of research. I was thinking, this is a piece of PhD research. It's that, it's so in depth. So I don't think we're going to do it justice, but I've got some things that I really, really want to chat to you about. But I thought let's start with so it was written, published in March 2020. I mean, the timing couldn't have been more perfect and more awful at the same time, I think. But what was the inspiration behind the book? Why tribes, tribalism and belonging? Why was that so important to you when you set off to write it?
Look, I've realized that my books are a kind of therapy. And I've got a feeling that I'm going to continue writing throughout the rest of my political career, because I don't keep a diary. I wish I had the discipline to do a diary every day, but but instead I sort of work on these books, and I'm working on my next book now. This book was really a reaction to our times. It was that massive mood change that really occurred in the UK after the decision, you know, the referendum decision really. During that campaign, we had the murder of Joe Cox. Suddenly, we were cast into a different place. And to some extent, we've remained in that place, haven't we? Even though Brexit has receded and the pandemic has come to the fore. And it's a place that's very divided. It's a place that feels very fragmented. It's a place where you see this new tribalism all around us. And on a personal level for me, it's been a place where, you know, I have had to come to terms and acquire much thicker hide in terms of the abuse directed at me on a pretty daily basis. You just have to look at the, you know, what's said on under my tweets, really. And but that's not just about me. It's just the mood of the times. This coincides with Trump and a president in the United States that, on any analysis, changed the dial on what it meant to lead a country. And to some extent, Boris Johnson is doing something similar over here, for good or ill. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, wanting to be even-handed, and cancel culture, all of these new themes. And it's really that I wanted to make sense of, as much for myself as for anybody else. And so the book is, as you know, in part has a memoir feel. It's me reflecting on the tribes that I'm from and what makes me me. But obviously coming out of that into some of the bigger themes of our time, and these are political themes. So identity politics, loneliness, kind of globalisation, what does localism mean, and what does a common identity around the nation mean, and is it important anymore? Should it be important? So those were really the issues that I was exploring. And you know, when you've done a book, great thing about a non-fiction book particularly is that at the end of the process you kind of know your own mind until the book's shot down. But I'm still at the stage where I know my own mind at the moment.
Yeah, and it's very prescient as a book, actually. When I was reading it, having lived through 2020 like we all have, you know, actually those themes that you've just mentioned there, loneliness, tribalism, the polarization of what passes for debate in the country at the moment, you know, all of those things I think just were brought into even sharper focus by 2020. You know, they weren't superseded for me. And you talk about bringing your own personal story in, and I wonder if we could start there just as a way in, because that's how the book starts. So I know you had a DNA test as part of the abolition of slavery commemorations, and there were some quite interesting results when you got them back. So I wondered if you wanted to tell us something about that, and what made you pursue one particular bit of that rich mix in your DNA.
So yes, the book starts with me receiving a DNA test, and in a way, I would encourage everybody on this to take a DNA test, not because you don't trust your mum, but although it has been known that people have taken DNA tests and got some rather startling news, but because actually it's fascinating to know who you're connected to and where they are in the world. And I did this DNA test back in 2007 for the commemoration of the bicentenary of the slave trade, end of the slave trade. The Science Museum asked me to do it, and I guess as the descendant of enslaved people, you know, my parents were very much part of that Windrush generation. They came from Guyana after the Second World War. But basically, if you are the descendant of enslaved people, there's always something in you that's thinking about where your ancestors are from, which bit of Africa they're from. We sort of forget that my ancestors would have been pulled from Africa more or less as children. Within a generation or two, would have lost their language, their religion, their culture, because that's what happens. If, you know, I've got, my oldest is 15, my youngest is 7. If they were plucked from here and transported, by the time they have children and they have children, much that they've acquired has sort of vanished, you know what I mean? So that's what happened. And so I was hugely intrigued to do this DNA test, and it came back and it basically said on my father's side, I was Bantu, South African, and Southern African, stretching all the way to Angola. I had on my mother's side some Temne, the Temne tribe who are in Sierra Leone, and also the Tuaregs in Niger. Now, I'd never really heard of Niger, and I'd certainly not heard of, well, not really heard of the Tuareg people. They'd sometimes described as the blue people, sort of Berber people that move around in that sort of part of north East Central Africa. And that was curious to me. I was delighted to be able to share that information with my mother before she died, who was hugely intrigued and slightly shocked that that probably meant they were Muslim, because she was a big Christian. And so it was sort of interesting to her that that was the case. And I sort of vowed that I would go back to the country, and really the chapter's about me going back and spending time with these people. And slavery still exists in that country to this day, but I was embraced by them, prayed with them, sat with them, and it was a very moving experience. And I sort of found myself looking at the faces of these Nigerians and thinking about them being my relatives, or who was like, you know, who was a relative, who wasn't. And they took me into their hearts. But the bottom line was, in the end, I wasn't, you know, I'm not really Nigerian, really. So the book goes on to explore my years in Peterborough, my years in Tottenham, and my Englishness. I should say also, of course, that the test came back saying that I've got some Scottish blood in me.
Oh, so you'll be off up to Glasgow next then, on the Odyssey to the Highlands.
Which was intriguing but not surprising.
Well,
given
somebody somewhere's done,
somewhere there was a Scot who got his way.
Yeah, he flexed his muscles maybe in his power. So did any of that change you? Did it do something profound to you to go back, or is that just a fantasy that you go back to where your roots are and feel more of something? Did it center you in some way?
It did center me in some way. It coincides with a kind of, you know, I sometimes talk about life. I'm sure we all have a sense of this. I spent a long time becoming. You know, I grew up working class, black in Tottenham, a minority in this country. Lots of challenges really in my background. I got this break, went to a good school, but the truth is I really suffered quite strongly with a strong sense of imposter syndrome by the time I got into Parliament. And I think there are probably many women particularly that know what that feels like, working class people of all backgrounds who know what that feels like. And I guess I'm having this conversation with you really no longer becoming, having become. I am pretty much, I know who I am. I know where I stand in the ground. I'm happy to take the knocks in politics that you get, because I kind of know where I'm coming from and why I'm in this business and what I'm here for. I suppose that journey to Niger was part of that process, an important part of that process, but paradoxical at the same time, because it was both about where are my ancestors from? And Niger is really one of the poorest countries on the planet. I mean, poverty is real. It's a large part of it's a desert. It was an amazing thing to be in, literally I was like Lawrence of Arabia, in turbans and gowns, across the country. So there was something very almost romantic, exotic about the whole thing. But it was also affirming, because sometimes you have to go quite far really to realize, in a way, how English I am. Therefore, to come to terms with who you are today, as it were. So yes.
And it's interesting because identity is at the center of the book, I think, and there is this paradox about people needing to belong, but that kind of need to belong being exploited. That tension is, for me, is playing all the way through the book, and I guess people like you and me have got the privilege of finding our identity. And you talk about your identity being multi-layered. You're a football fan, and you're an MP, and you're a father, and you're this and you're that. But for a lot of people that, they don't have the same access to identity. I was really struck throughout the book about your compassion and your empathy with people. So you mentioned Peterborough there, but when you went back to Peterborough and talked to Kathy and Clive, who were parents of your school friend, who have very different beliefs and very different life experience for you, and yet you listen to them, and I know you don't agree with them, but you're really seeing them as human beings, not as kind of somehow, oh, well, they're a bit silly Brexit voting people. And is it easier to access that compassion when you feel secure in yourself, do you think?
Well, there's quite a lot of questions there.
Sorry, I did ask about 4 questions in that one.
The first thing to say, in a slightly more a broader level, is we do all have this need for belonging. That is innate to human beings. It starts with us, and I explore this in terms of anthropology and behavioral science. It starts with human beings sort of, we're in a unit bigger than just the family unit, in literally a tribe, or as we might convey that, a small sort of gathering of people, and coming upon a different tribe, and either choosing to war with those people across the valley, or because they're slightly different, have slightly different culture, or pooling efforts, hunting together because you can gain more food or whatever, and providing for yourself. But that need to attach and belong to a group of people is innate, because it's the way we survive. Left on our own devices, I'm afraid we're not going to survive. Babies cannot survive on their own. They have to be reared, and the truth is, virtually impossible to do that in most parts of the world. Certainly in our history, only as a family unit. So there is something innate, that a survival mechanism, that means that we have to belong somewhere. And so what I was exploring is that what is good tribalism, and what is less good tribalism, and what is this phenomenon of the new tribalism. So clearly what's going on at the moment is that there is people are feeling a lack of belonging, and that's what the book's really about, exploring that lack of belonging, the loneliness that comes from a social media world, the nature of the job market changing, globalisation, massive regional variation. In London, you can feel quite connected in a way, particularly if you're middle class. Less so in other parts of the country, and indeed in other parts of the world. And what does that mean? And frankly, for me, I explore some of the hate that I received by going to a court case, and the man who did it on this occasion was a pretty sad individual who was lonely and wanted to belong, and he picked a sort of far right sort of community. And I explore a case I come across of a young man who's seduced by extremism and goes off to join ISIS. And that's, that stuff is real. This stuff is happening because
but you take
of
a
that
very
absence.
compassionate stance towards that. And
But sorry, just on your second point, second point on a more personal level, I would not be here in front of you able to speak in the way I am were it not for the 7 years I spent in Peterborough.
Yeah.
I went to the King's School, Peterborough. I was a cathedral chorister. I was the first black cathedral chorister in that city. There wasn't much black community in that city. I'll be honest with you, it was the early 1980s. There was a lot of racism in both the city and the school that I was in. And I could spend a lot of time talking about that. But the truth is, I succeeded. And why did I succeed? Because racism and prejudice and difference can coexist at the same time as love and care and charm. And I also met wonderful people who took me under their wing. None of them looked like me. Friends and parents of pupils. There were day pupils and boarders. And I went back to visit some of those people who I've remained in contact with, who definitely voted to exit the European Union, have different views to me about immigration, but they're people that love me and I love them, and I'm very grateful to them. And so what I wanted to write about in that chapter was really about Englishness. Was I didn't want to write in this sort of slightly sneering, what's the word? Sneering, elite, metropolitan, can I get away with the word guardianista kind of way? I wanted to write in a way which I hope that many of us understand, which is that many of us have got families, including my own, where you were holding in your broader extended family remain and leave. Some families are holding at the moment lockdown and open up. That is the truth of life, and I wanted to write about that in a real way. So I don't think that is solely about compassion. I actually just think that's real life. Most of us are living in that paradox, and that's the way I wanted to write, because it's the truth. The truth is not as binary as politics sometimes makes it. It's way messier and more complicated than that.
Well, and my take is there's a vested interest in keeping that polarization, because while people are fighting each other over leave, remain, vaccination, not vaccination, these very polarized debates, in Sheffield we had the trees, save the trees, and it became save the trees or cut the trees down. I mean, it became so ridiculously polarized, but while people are fighting that, then they're not coming together collectively to make change. So I believe there's a vested interest in the media, in certain political arenas to keep people separate. But how do you broker those conversations so that we're not just at extremes? How do we tolerate complexity when what people want is certainty?
We've become very bad at tolerating complexity. I had a conversation with Jean on LBC a few weeks ago, which went viral. It really surprised me that it went viral. It went viral because Jean expressed what most people would perceive to be quite racist views. She talked about the way in which she talked about me not being able to be English. And sort of referenced it, sort of polluting her understanding of English to allow me to be English. And people were outraged by her and impressed by the fact that I'd managed to have this conversation without losing my cool. I felt that was a slightly binary conversation. Jean was 80. I would have thought there are very few people on here who want their 80-year-old granny on TV talking about her views. unless she's really seasoned at it, because all of us have senior relatives who've got views that are fine in a family arena, but we don't want them on TV, right? Or on radio. That's the first thing. And how is it that we've lost the honesty to be able to say that? And then two, I, in my conversation with Jean, whilst I disagreed with her politely and pointed out some facts to her, I didn't handle Jean in the same way that I would handle Jacob Rees-Mogg or Nigel Farage.
I should bloody hope not, God.
Or someone who has a public platform. And people have seen me be very exacting if you've got a public platform. And so I think you're right. It's the nuance. We've become so binary. I actually think, by the way, that social media's got a lot to answer for. So I write about this in the book as well at length, the narcissism index and how that's spiraling, because we're living in this world of selfies, me, myself, and I. But actually, it's the way in which also the ability to write, the ability to tweet, the ability to say you're wrong. Well, this is all hardened if you've had higher education and you're a wordsmith. Not everyone has those gifts, but their opinions shouldn't be dismissed because they left school at 15 or 14, and somehow their views, the way they might express their views on a medium like Twitter, we jump down their throats. So we do, in a way, the modern world is less supportive of difference, and the range and where people are coming from, and also kind of what we share, because we all share a hell of a load more than we don't. And again, I suppose I was writing in that groove because in the end, I've got a critique of Britain, a strong critique of Britain. I'm a Labour MP, I'm a black Labour MP. I've got a strong critique of Britain. But let's be absolutely clear. I love my country. I don't want to be anywhere else. This is where I'm raising my kids. I do recognise that Britain, is one of the best places in the world. You can have a critique, but hold a fondness at the same time. And I didn't want to lose that.
You're more forgiving than me. I mean, I'm from an Indian heritage. I'm dual heritage, and grew up in the 60s and 70s. I think I'm a bit older than you, and experienced terrible racism in Rotherham, which was a decaying industrial town. It's really, really tough. But I found those chapters in the book where you talk about Englishness and national pride. I thought, well, hats off to you, because you're a bigger person than I am. Because if asked, I'm not English. I mean, as it happened, my mum was Welsh. So, but in England, I'd be a Yorkshire woman before I'd be an English woman. Is where I'm at. Those values, English values. I ascribe to Yorkshire, but I wonder.
You can't just leave that. It's a really big point. I've got to come back on that.
So I mean, Yorkshire is. I was thinking, what are the when you were talking about values at the end of the book, and what are our national values, and how do we come around? And I was thinking, oh God, England, because I think small. No offense to everybody out there, small-minded, intolerant, covertly racist at best. So I ascribe a kind of set of negative things, and I think Yorkshire people are plain-speaking, grounded, kind of ornery and stubborn, but really independent thinking, and we live in the most beautiful part of the country. So so I'm really partisan in that way.
God's own country.
Yeah.
I'm very fond of Yorkshire, by the way. Look, so what you find, particularly amongst those from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, is they're okay at saying Britishness, partly because empire allows you to claim that. The British Empire stretched so far, it allows you to own that. And they are less comfortable with Englishness. Now, some of that I think is wrapped up, which I talk a lot about, an inability. England struggles to tell a story of itself, warts and all. Somehow it holds the great of Great Britain very dear and won't allow room for uncomfortable truths. I revealed one the other day with the way that this country treated African soldiers and servicemen in the First World War, and the fact that they were not buried in the same way as white British soldiers.
Shocking. You could say the same about the Burmese, about, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so there's a sort of double standard. When I talk about slavery, there's a rush to say, but we abolished it first. And very little time is dwelt on the hundreds of years it went on, how it created modern Britain. And look at the way the Windrush nationals have been treated, and not just, this isn't a past tense, are still being treated today. So I get all of that, but the problem is, if I can't claim my Englishness, given this is where I'm born and raised, if Englishness isn't a civic national identity, which is what I talk about in the book, if it's an ethnic national identity, i.e. you've got to be, I don't know what it is, Anglo-Saxon or something to be English, then we're in a really dangerous place. And it's worrying that there's a conspiracy between those with extreme politics that want to own the English flag, that want to claim an Englishness, and parts of Black, Asian and minority that are happy to sort of leave them to it. That's a bad place to be. And so that it was important to explore that, I think, and for us as a country to think about that. And I'm glad that the book has prompted the Labour Party today, notwithstanding the challenges that we have, but under Keir Starmer, beginning to tread into that territory and think a bit harder about it.
So yeah, you talk about, I thought it was a great, there's so many beautiful phrases in the book. You talk about this baseless nostalgia that I think the far right are exploiting, this kind of idea that we were all Morris dancing and drinking one beer, all of that. But I wonder, how do we have these nuanced conversations about our past, about some of the shameful things of empire and colonialization, and there's a really powerful passage in the book where you talk about white fragility. I think it seems to me that shame and fear get in the way of good conversation and nuance, and that's what's going to take us beyond this polarization, is if we can open up and have dialogue. So I wonder what your thoughts are about that. How do we have difficult conversations when we need to?
Look, I do think we have to start with a more powerful sense of what we share. And we have to be in the business, which I'm afraid here in the UK and specifically in England, we're not good at, of nation building. I think we don't quite realize how new countries, countries that have experienced massive catastrophe, war, other things, really are in the business of building a nation. They're in the business of binding people together on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. We're really lazy about it. We assume that a good old, the Duke of Edinburgh died recently. There was lots of pomp and ceremony, even though subdued because of the pandemic. And we almost assume that's sufficient, and it's not. And so I do think you've got to have a safe space where we can share, and that's got to be a bit more than when England's playing or winning or losing in the European Cup or the World Cup. But then beyond that, the big question you're asking is how, you see, my passion is this. If Britain could tell and be honest about the warts and all story of colonialism, teach it in our schools, and it's still the case that my children are not learning about this in their schools.
Mine didn't either.
So generations ignorant. Imagine how great we really could be. Imagine how we could own our multiculturalism and be really powerful. Imagine what it's like to talk to a dictatorship or an authoritarian leader or country that's killing half its people about genocide or mass murder, or the horrible continued breaching of serious fundamental human rights. Imagine what that's like if you're doing it from a position where you say, look, in our history, we did this, but we learned from it. And a country that can't do that, that's kind of, so this isn't just about us internally, it's also about what could be possible, but isn't quite possible because of this inability to come to terms with this. And I suppose in talking about white fragility, you'll know there that I pick a subject that most of my researchers had warned me off for years, which was comic relief. They had said, don't go anywhere near it. It's so beloved. You can't.
You went right into it.
You can't say anything negative about comic relief. But I went there because I knew that black communities, black and brown communities, were switching off comic relief in droves, dreading it coming round. Parents dreading their kids coming back with that red nose, dreading that because the way that they're learning about the continent of Africa, no one knows that there are skyscrapers in Lagos and Dar es Salaam. They don't know that Africa's got more growth than Europe combined. They don't ever hear the positive stories, and they what does support, aid, trade look like when it's really a partnership, not just white celebrities flying in, navigating and dropping out. So and I raised this with comic relief over many, many years, and there was a lot of fragility that I even raised it. And Richard Curtis, liberal, bent, popular. I'm not saying he's a bad man, but what I saw was white fragility, an inability to accept, it was, how could you call me racist kind of thing was his reaction, not able to hear or listen. It's a wonderful book, White Fragility. If you haven't read it, I'd encourage participants to order it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think that sense of, I might have to give up some ground here in order to have this conversation. I might have to accept that, I was only trying to help, but that help might not actually be very needed or wanted or given in the right way. I think that's a big challenge. I've got to ask you this question and not skirt around it. What do you think are the possibilities of making change while we've got the Tories in power? I mean, it seems to me that while greed is good and the focus is on profit, that a lot of these conversations aren't going to happen. That's my very cynical take on it, that we're not in that position to start to rebuild a better future. I mean, I'm just so that I won't ask you another question. I'll stick at that question.
Well, let me start by being generous.
Go on.
Let me start by saying that David Cameron, just 5 years ago, asked me to lead a review on the criminal justice system and the problems of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people overrepresented in that criminal justice system. I think he was sincere about that. It was David Cameron that hugged a hoodie, whatever you think about that. And by doing that, he put the issue of the criminal justice system and race into a bipartisan pace. And I want to congratulate him for doing that, because it deserves not to be a political football. Theresa May set up the race disparity audit and made widespread changes to stop and search when she was Home Secretary. Now, let me just get more political. it's also the case that the Conservatives at that time wanted to be liberal on race, but were incredibly hardline on immigration and almost aping Nigel Farage. So I could see what was going on, as it were. And also I would have had a difference of opinion about how you deal with some of these problems. Theresa was into gathering the data, but there wasn't much happening to change once you got the data. But I wanted to be generous to Conservatives because there was, that was the window that was open. I want to distinguish then also what was happening then and what is happening now. Because when I'm asked the question about Boris Johnson and race, particularly, and the issues of identity, of loneliness, of belonging, of well-being, boy, oh boy, oh boy, we're in a very different place. We're in a place that's about a populist place. Mm. We're in a place that's out of the Trump playbook. We're in a place that stokes division for political advantage.
Yeah.
If you launch culture wars every week, this week's culture war is let's shut down debate on university campuses. Let's bring voter ID in so people have to present their passports or driving licenses to vote. These are policies designed specifically to generate a debate that specifically have people like me and you animated and upset, but have a majority, they view, a core vote view, that says, oh God, I'm sick of hearing from David Lammy and we're going to vote. It's deliberately designed to do that.
Is that what happened in Hartlepool, do you think, David?
That's a political question. I'll come back to that.
I know. I can't resist it.
But that leads to a very dangerous place, because eventually politicians lose control of where that leads empirically, and it's a disaster. So underlying your question is a brute seriousness. And underlying my book is a brute seriousness of where these questions of identity, belonging lead to if we do not get back to what we share, what we have in common, and a sort of faith, really. And yes, we can have political disagreements, but let us be in the business of an enterprise that's about a joint enterprise, which is the business of our nation.
Yeah, I asked the Hartlepool question. So I heard reported, I didn't hear the person speak himself, and he was reported to have said, well, when asked why did he vote Tory in Hartlepool, he said, well, there didn't used to be any food banks around here and now there's 9. As if that was a good thing, that the Tories had provided food banks, rather than that the Tories had created the conditions where food banks were needed. And I was thinking about, we can easily sneer at that and go, that stupid man. And that's, to me, is exactly what the book's about. How did that happen? How did that man get so isolated from the reality of what had happened locally? But it seems to me it's just trying to polarize him so that we despise him. I don't despise him. I have my head in my hands thinking, how are we going to help these people? Because they've now got a Tory minister, a Tory MP rather. So I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. But
I think that, again, we would do better to revisit the history books.
Okay.
Right. So how can I put this in a nuanced way? European countries like our own have, if you went back 300 years, 250 years, you would still be in a place, this is before the Industrial Revolution, where you had big agricultural economies, where you had a serious aristocracy that owned a lot of the wealth, and where there was a powerful, or meant to be a powerful sense of noblesse oblige, where there was a trickle down and a paternalism, probably best seen on Downton Abbey. And it's slightly disingenuous to give the sort of feel that these tracts of the country have always been Labour towns. They haven't. They haven't. They've got long histories where people looked to the Lord of the Manor as a paternalistic to take care of us. The Labour Party comes along in the 20th century after the Industrial Revolution with a powerful sense of workers' rights and a sort of, a lifting up, a self-actualization of the working man. But let's be clear, the Labour Party was only in power for 22 years of the 20th century. 22, tiny.
Yeah, well, I feel like I lived most of those.
So we tell this binary story about this red wall, as if this red wall has existed. I'm not so sure about that. And, is it that surprising that some communities might say, look, actually, I'm not saying we trust the Tories, but we might be better off under them because they're in power. We might get a bit more. Labour aren't in power. So I think it's complicated in that nuanced discussion. And again, we come back to Englishness and what does that really mean? I'm not sure it's as binary as commentators would have us believe.
Yeah, well, and maybe nuance doesn't make for good headlines, I would say. David, what I'm going to do is open up for some questions now that are going to come through me. So let's go into the Q&A. Oh my goodness, there's so many. So I believe that I'm just going to go to the top. So bear with me a second.
I'm going to get them up as well to help you.
Yeah, please do, because I'm not sure how this upvoting. What do you think of upvoting? Could they adopt it in the comments?
Sounds a bit rude to me, but anyway.
Yeah, well, I know. I didn't like to say. Right, where should we start? Where are you looking? So let's take a question. So
you can see the point. So I can see, so there's one with 23 thumbs up.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so this is Julie. Is it possible to, so carrying on from that conversation, is it possible to see the disappointing election results for Labour as a change in people's tribal allegiances and how they define them?
We have a two-party system that has strengths for strong government and huge weaknesses, because the truth is the political parties themselves are big coalitions. I personally am a bit concerned when the coalitions that take over political parties are coming from what would traditionally be seen as the extremities of those parties. I think something has happened with the Conservative Party that sort of gets overlooked at the moment. And clearly, the Labour Party, in its previous incarnation, it presented challenges. But I say this as someone who represents Tottenham, born and raised in Tottenham, but spent 7 years in Peterborough. There will be no Labour government unless we are abroad churched. It just doesn't happen. 22 years in the 20th century tells you that it doesn't happen. My lived experience is that the British people, the English people particularly, have a small c conservative thing running through them, and that's just self-evident. I think that it's a long road back for the Labour Party. We can do it, but like all progressive left, centre-left movements all over the world, in an age of populism, it's tough. And you are seeing this peeling away of a certain kind of working class voter. And but we have to understand that. We have to be up for that. We have to not fall into the traps. We have to frame the debate better. By God, we've got to be more unified. We have been airing our dirty linen in public since the dying days of Blair and Brown. And it's been going on now for over a decade. These endless internal rowing in public. It is a long time that we took the dirty linen off the line and brought it into the house. You cannot expect the electorate to take you seriously if you appear divided. And it's never good, by the way, when you turn on the Today programme and you hear two Labour voices coming from different sides of the party. On the whole, that's a bad look.
Yeah, it really doesn't model what you're talking about, which is nuance and consensus and shared values. And I wonder what there is to learn in Andy Burnham getting every single ward, in Greater Manchester, and appealing to the different tribes, because that's a hugely diverse area that he's covering there.
He is covering a very diverse area. I think there are a couple of themes though we should remember. One is we've had a tough year. Mm. And the overwhelming sense I feel when I knock on people's doors is a sense of relief at the vaccination and a sense of euphoria that we might be able to get back to some degree of normality. And the truth is, all incumbents people are sticking with what they know in these times, right across the country, on the whole. And whilst we know that there is a real sort of sneering at a degree of globalisation, and there's a fracturing, some of the politics between England and Scotland represents that, doesn't it? You see that coming to the surface again in Northern Ireland, and you certainly see it in the politics of identity, race, sexuality, gender. I think for these mayors that represent a much smaller unit to which people can be collected goes back to my questions of belonging. Yeah. And Andy has really cut across that and chimed well with that mood, and I think is benefiting hugely electorally as a result of it.
Thank you. So I'm going to go from the explicitly political to the explicitly personal. So here's a question from Udit. David, how are you keeping health-wise, socio-emotional and physical? I love this, what are your rituals of recalibration and joy in the face of racist evisceration as a Black person? So how do you keep so well? I mean, you look well to me, you look tip-top.
Well, I mean, the ingredients of how I keep well are that I have old friends that knew me long before I entered politics, who were very important to me and in my life. My father left me when I was 12, and I take my parenting almost too seriously. I like to be there for my children despite my busy life. And then I have these things that I do that are important to me for my personal well-being. I am obsessed with film. If my office can't find me, I've disappeared. If there's a stressful moment in politics or wherever, they usually have to pull me out of the Curzon cinema on Victoria Street. Ever since I was a child, I use film as a way almost to disappear from the life around me. I love entering other worlds that are not my own. I love theatre as well, for that reason. Spurs means a lot to me. So there are, and I know it's boring, I know it's not fashionable, I know it puts some people off, but I also have a Christian faith that I've had all of my life. And for me, it works for me because I don't want to stress the Christian, I just want to stress the faith, because it connects me to something spiritual that means that for me, it's not just about me. And I don't think I could do this job if I left it just to the Guardian as my Bible. I just find that really hard. So that's quite important for me. When you ask me about my well-being, I want to be honest. Look, I have had moments when I have had, when I've been down, I've been depressed, I've had the black clouds over me in my life. I talked about imposter syndrome, and I have had profound sense of loneliness. It's sometimes lonely at the top. It's lonely when you move from a working class life to a middle class one. It's lonely to be so often the only black guy in the room. And and definitely towards the back end of this this period we've been in now, you know, I've not found my own well-being entirely easy, I'll be honest with you, because I love my own company. God, I'm a paradox. You know, I can speak to an audience, speak to a crowd, but I'm actually a one-to-one guy who is really fond of my own company. And I found having to work from home with kids in and out, you know, I found that quite tough. Not even being able to get on the tube with my earphones in and listen to a bit of music. The lack of space for me, I found quite tough actually in this pandemic, and not being able to disappear in front of a big screen or in an audience in the theatre to think beyond my own the problems in front of me, to set some of the things I care about in a historic or a humorous or a whatever context. I found quite hard. I'm fortunate to be married to an artist, by the way, but the arts, music, all those things matter to me hugely.
And I can see some of the comments coming in, people saying thank you for your honesty. I think there's something universal that you've described there of people hankering after space and, you know, spaciousness and being able to take the bigger picture. So yeah, I can see the audience and I am really appreciating that. So let's I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So here's another personal one. This is about where we started, really, this journey into your own heritage. So this is Tom asking, did researching your family history, heritage and writing your book influence or change your approach to being an MP? And if it did, how did it change your approach?
I don't know if it changed my approach to being an MP. There's a bit in my book where I talk about, when I go to Niger, I also find out quite a lot about modern slavery that's happening in Niger as we speak. And there's a bit of a shame in that country about the reality of slavery, and it's definitely, you speak to people who have been slaves today, i.e. owned by somebody else, and there's huge embarrassment, obviously, and a sort of, there's shame and guilt, really, and they're the lowest of the lows. You know, it's a bit like in the context of southern India and the caste system, untouchables. There's a sort of that's present in society there, and there I was, the descendant of enslaved people, an MP that people could see standing up in the House of Commons, this big important centre of democracy in the world, and that was quite humbling. I said to them at the end, I'll talk about this experience in the House of Commons. And that made me well up. It made me quite emotional. It confirms a view that it's been very present in my politics for the last, I would say, really, since Labour left office in 2010, an understanding that I have a platform. I feel hugely fortunate to have it. My own view is that anyone who is privileged, in a sense, has a platform, by the way. I'm not sure people fully understand what it means to use the platform they have, really. Let me just say, by the way, it's why I find some of the debate about Black Lives Matter frustrating, and some of the discourse in Britain so deeply lowest common denominator, because for me, a lot of the discussion about race, Black Lives Matter, blackness, it's not really about blackness, it's about whiteness. I think that allies need to use their platforms more. It tires me out that Newsnight ring me up and ring up somebody. I say, look, you know, can you come on and talk about it? I'd love to see some white folk talking about it. Yeah. You know, I really would. And why? Why do we do this to our 4% of the population? That'd be great. But never seen it. You don't see that on TV. You get, what you see is me being asked yet again to open my wounds in public and to, you know, does racism really exist? And people wonder why. It's like, feels like gaslighting.
Oh.
So just to get back to what I meant was, look, I have a platform, and what I've learned and what Niger confirmed to me is I'm damn well going to use that platform to speak up on people who would die to be in the House of Commons. They would die to just have 15 minutes of what I can say to Boris Johnson. They would just give their right arm to have those 15 minutes. And people sometimes say, oh, you're passionate, or you're this, you're that. They have spent no time in a barbershop in Tottenham. They have no idea. What I am saying is so sanitized. But I'm going to use that platform on behalf of those people I represent. Of course, the Labour Party is a big dimension of that, but let me be honest, it's absolutely not the only dimension of that. I'm speaking really from what it means to be working class, what it means to be of colour, what it means to be educated, what it means to try to live and walk with people who have far less than I have. What it means to have a father that leaves at 12. All of those things is what I'm bringing to bear, that platform, what it means to, what does it mean? When I'm talking about comic relief, I'm speaking up for those people I met in Niger. Do you see what I mean? That's what I've learned.
Well, and you do it with, I mean, I think I speak for everybody in the audience. You do it with such grace and with such passion and belief and conviction. I mean, it just shines out of you. And what I particularly loved about the book, apart from everything in it, was the you know, you don't shy away from the difficult things. You have a position, you state that position, and it's completely evidence-based. It's so thoroughly researched. You know, you bring in your own anecdotes, you bring in research, you know, you just bring in this wealth of stuff. So you're standing on really solid ground and then bringing your heart and soul into it. I mean, it was a real
But you
pleasure.
know, I'd be shot to bits if I didn't, right?
No, exactly. I know. And especially as a black man,
Shot
you
to
have
bits.
to have all of your evidence. I mean, I was thinking, here's a lawyer with a heart. You know, you can do that and you can speak. And I think, you know, to have spokespeople like you in the House in positions of power, we need more. I think what great role modeling. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to take any more questions. There are, you know, loads on there. And you can just see how much this has provoked debate. But I know you've got to go and close the debate on the Queen's speech in a few minutes. So I just wanted to end. So the
see Priti Patel on the floor.
Oh, don't. I'm glad I can't. Well, let's not get personal, but yes. What was interesting when I was preparing for this interview, I was thinking, oh, I'll drop a few current things in. This was a couple of weeks ago, and they were just every day brings some new horror that's being exposed. And I just gave up thinking what's the most current thing, because it's almost minute by minute that something else comes to light. Where I wanted to get to as we finish, David, is the so the end of the book is a set of proposals, a set of propositions about what you call encounter culture, which I liked for its practicality. It's like, I think we should do this and I think we should do that, and you don't shy away from suggesting that some things should be compulsory, which I thought was bold. So what does give you hope for the future? Do you think we can not build back better? Do you think we can build a bright future for England, for Britain?
Well, look, let me say that I think I am hopeful primarily because, broadly speaking, I'm really, really enthusiastic and hopeful about the millennial generation and about Generation Z, as they're calling them. I think younger people, white and black, get a lot of what we've been talking about. I find when I'm talking about them wherever they are in the country on issues of race, sexuality, climate justice, these guys are on it. They are the children of baby boomers. They are a big generation. They're a long way from power at the moment. They're not running FTSE 100 companies. They're not running political parties, but they will get there. In the meantime, baby boomers are still running a lot, and you and I are Gen Xers. We're a sort of mini generation of Thatcher's kids. We're mini baby boomers. We sort of look in both directions, but we're quite a small generation. I suppose I say that because we are in this is a period that's, there's a lot of clinging on to what is past. There's a nostalgia for what has gone. It's a curious period as well, obviously, Trump being the best personification of that, but to some extent Boris Johnson being a similar thing. But it will pass. And my propositions at the end of the book are a starter for 10. They're not conclusive, but because I'm interested in how we come together, for example, I suggested a national civic service that's compulsory. I need to emphasize that is not Labour Party policy. I wrote the book before I became on the front bench, but it was a provocateur, really, because whilst I know that Guardianistas really balk at the idea of something that's compulsory, and I'm not talking about the armed service, I'm talking about civic service, I suppose I feel quite strongly. I got to go to university. When I went, I met kids from different parts of the country. My best mates are one's from the Wirral, the other was from Jarrow, another one from Berkshire. If you don't go to university, how does a kid in Tottenham meet someone from Sunderland? How does that happen in our society? Does that matter? Is it important to share stuff? And we don't seem to have an answer for that. So that's why I suggested civic service. I'm also interested in intergenerational, how does a young person meet an older person beyond their family groups? Those sorts of things are quite big things in society that's struggling with belonging and well-being and wellness. So that was a starter for 10. There are others in the book, but it's once you provoke this conversation, then you have to end in a place where not just where you've described the problems, but you've described some of the solutions. And governments would do well to get into the solutions. There's a sort of absence of seriousness amongst the world leaders. It's so depressing. There are very few grown-ups in the room. I mean, Angela Merkel is not in my political tradition, but thank God for one grown-up who seems to care about the challenges of immigration, aging population, pandemic, where it's not all about a vaccine solely for you, because actually the Germans could have gone down a different road with their vaccine because they've got lots of capacity to produce it, and some of the scientists existed there. There are very, very few national leaders that are able to think much beyond a political cycle and much beyond their core vote. And it's we've got to get beyond that, because otherwise we're going to end up with a very, very atomized country that's almost in a state of maybe not physical civil war, but a sort of internal strife, which, by the way, some of our opponents, Russian interference and all the rest of it, are exploiting and stirring and encouraging.
I can't believe that we've come to the end. David, I could talk to you honestly for hours. The book is so crammed with so many things that we didn't even touch on. You just hinted about vaccine equity there. We could just go on and on. But I want to say thank God for Angela Merkel.
So generous.
Thank God for you. I mean, thank God for another grown-up in the room. We must let you go and do your good stuff to give voice to women and girls in our collective fight against the violence that we receive. So this is important work. We'll let you get on with it. I want to say a massive thank you from Sheffield, on behalf of Sheffield. Thank you from the Festival of Debate. Come back anytime. I would love to find out what your next book is about, but we'll save that for next time. But thank you so much for your generosity in spending time with us today. I know from the chat's just gone wild, so I know people have really appreciated your perspectives. Read the book, it's fabulous, people. So can't wait. See you next time.
Thank you so much.
We're going to go and tune into Parliament TV now and see you in action. Thank you so much, David.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Appreciate it.